BookTube, welcome back to my channel and welcome to A Closer Book. This is a series where I review 3 of my recent reads. Today we're up to books 79 to 81, and first up is book 79, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's short story collection entitled The Thing Around Your Neck. This is a short story collection that was first published in 2009, so this was published well before her 2013 novel Americana that received a lot of success. The stories in here are very descriptive and cutting, and some of the themes are universal in their reach. And in this one you can see evidence of her storytelling brilliance that has led to gripping novels like Americana and Half of a Yellow Sun, which actually won her the Orange Broadband Prize. First is Cell 1, which is a young girl narrating the story of how her older brother is favored by their parents. They look away whenever he does anything wrong, and they don't intervene until he becomes a criminal and gets arrested for a crime that he probably did commit based on her description of his character. In this one, she shines a light on police injustice and corruption in general, but also shows how sometimes it takes getting in trouble in this way for a criminal or a person with criminal tendencies to eventually change. Story number 2 is entitled Imitation, and it's about this Nigerian woman who's living with her 2 children in the United States while her husband continues to live and work in Nigeria. She hears that he is having an affair, and it brings her to examine the relationship that she has with him and to try to kind of figure out who is the imitation wife. Is it her who she rarely sees her husband, or the mistress that he's probably keeping up in their old home in Nigeria? Which one is the real wife? There are elements of this story that will remind you of a plot line in Americana, and in fact the author uses that term in this story as well to describe the American-born children of Nigerian immigrants. The title story, Thing Around Your Neck, reminds me of the Ifemelo character in Americana, which is about this young Nigerian girl who arrives in America with big dreams, but she's disappointed at almost every juncture. The sexual assaults, the menial jobs, and when she finally finds a relationship, it's an interracial one, so no matter how well they connect on certain levels, there are things that she's struggling with that he just can't identify. So the thing that is supposed to feel like a dream constantly feels like a nightmare because the person who is supposed to understand her struggles really can't identify with them, so at all points she feels suffocated. If you liked Americana, you're gonna love the title story in this book. Tomorrow Is Too Far is written in second-person narrative, which makes it a very different kind of emotional read. It is directed to a woman whose brother died as a child, but even as an adult, now looking back, she's still haunted by the memory of the event, but also tortured by the role that she played or might have played in his demise. It's always interesting to read an author's backlisted publications because you can see seeds of later works in them, or you can see how the author's career has transitioned from short stories to full-blown novels. I mean, Americana was over 500 pages. The short story in here that I told you reminded me of that was just maybe like 30 pages. In the back it tells you when the stories were published, if they had been published in some previous collection before, and some of these were written like in 1995, 1993, so they're from the beginning of Adichie's writing career. There were many characters in here that I feel like reappear in her later stories, so it became a game to spot the character. Reading Adichie's work inspires feelings in me that make me feel numb and impotent to protect the characters, even though she has, you know, kind of laid their lives so openly in front of me. It was one of the books that I thought I was going to give a 5-star rating when I did my 5-star prediction video. I didn't quite give this 5-star because there were a couple of stories that weren't excellent, but it's someplace between a 4 and a 5. Not giving it a 5 is just me being petty, but yeah, it's not quite a 5. Book number 80 is Harvest by Crace, and this novel was shortlisted for the 2013 Man Booker Prize. It is about a group of sharecroppers who wake up to this communal fear. One, that there is a strange fire, which is evidence of a new neighbor who is just unwelcome on many fronts, but also that the master's house might be on fire, and they are afraid not just that the master's house is on fire, but that they'll be blamed for not preventing it, punished in some way for the harvest celebration that left them heavy with rabble-rousing and left them impotent to act swift enough to prevent the damage from the fire. These pastoral people seem to parcel their lives in vague sexual undertones, using sexual references to describe everything in their social construct. There is description of bestiality, of adultery, of infidelity. There's a description of meeting a man and imagining that his beard has the same shape of a woman's private area. And that's only on page 6 of the novel. So very early in the novel, you realize that these are very primitive people who use very basic primal instincts to live their lives. One of the most primal instincts that humans have is fear and blame. And so that comes out a lot in this novel. These sharecroppers, they're all neighbors. A lot of them are related, which in itself poses a problem because there's a lot of inbreeding, and you know, inbreeding usually tends to diminish the strength of the species. And so meeting these sharecroppers at this point in their existence, after they have been inbred, means that they are not as strong as they could have been. Even though they're farmers and you expect strong people, they're not strong because of their close relations, except that they are so xenophobic. They don't trust strangers enough to really want to embrace them. And so the thing that would strengthen their stock, they're suspicious of and unwilling to welcome. So the setup for the story is that we've just celebrated the harvest. The master, the owner of the land, his wife has died, so his family situation has changed. As we read the novel, it is revealed that the land didn't belong to him. The land actually belonged to his wife. And so now that his wife has died, he is in danger of losing the property. And so a new owner might be coming in who does not want to interact with these sharecroppers the way that this previous master or current master did. What made this book a strong contender for the Booker Prize, I think, was the different levels on which this book could be read. Literally, it is the story of these people dealing with threats to their livelihood and how they respond with their primal basic fears, using the tools that are available to them to protect their livelihood, to protect their lives, to protect their families. As an allegory, however, the story also reflects the political climate of our country, and not just the United States, but worldwide, because this is a universal issue of citizens of a country not embracing immigrants or refugees coming to their shores, because there is the thought that, you know, they come in and they will change things. They'll come in and they will reduce the amount of resources that we have available to us, not thinking about how they could strengthen us, but how these strangers could weaken us. And that is the fear that is portrayed through this book, but it's also the fear that motivates a lot of the political decisions in a country. In a literal sense, the novel worked because it was well written and well thought out, very well developed plotline and very interesting characters. In a symbolic way, it also worked as very relevant social commentary describing relevant issues that are universal in their reach, because immigrants and refugees cross almost every border looking for a better life. And how we welcome or reject these strangers is a universal issue. But in a third level, it also functioned as this very interesting religious commentary. And the author used so many references that were biblical to show sacrifice and rebellion and forgiveness that made the novel just an exquisite read. And at the end, I gave this book a 5-star rating because I think that the novel achieved so much. It's very short, it's just over 200 pages, but within those 200 pages, the author endeared himself to me. In one instance, Harvest is the story of this group of sharecroppers who rely on their master for everything, including permission to plant and enjoy the fruits of their labor. It's like they're relying on the master for permission to live. However, the transcendent meaning behind Harvest is really the power of our choices, how the decisions that we make affect our lives and the lives of the people around us, and what happens when we allow ourselves to adopt these servile positions and allow people to think for us. What happens when you no longer decide for yourself, but you allow someone else to decide for you? Book number 81 is The Windfall by Diksha Basu. In this story, we meet an Indian family, a professional man, his wife, and their young adult son who is studying in the United States but has returned to India to help his parents move. The father, the professional, he's a computer expert, and he sold a website to an American company. And with the money, their windfall, they now have the means to move out of the community that they have lived in for decades, the community in which they raised their son, and now they are moving to this new, nice, highfalutin neighborhood. At once, we see some of the problems that this family is about to face. Their family and friends that they'll be leaving behind in this older community, they're suspicious and they're jealous. and they take out this jealous and suspicion on these people who, you know, have just experienced the American dream, well, the Indian dream. The son that they sent to the United States to get an American education and probably come back home to become wealthy, marry a traditional Indian woman, and improve his family status. Well, he's found himself an American girlfriend who is as far from the traditional Indian woman as you might expect. She's blonde hair, blue-eyed, and she favors crop tops instead of the conservative dress that they might be used to. And speaking of the son, his experience in America is very different from the vast numbers of immigrants and immigrant students who arrive in the United States every year, you know, scrimping and saving to buy textbooks and eating ramen noodles in their dorm. No, Rupak's experience is very different because he has this rich Indian father who replenishes his bank account as fast as he can spend the money entertaining women and living this life, reaping the benefits without understanding the labor that is required to get to that place. And so you understand from that introduction that this son is going to have some hardship because he hasn't learned the lesson that comes with the windfall that he is experiencing. The entire description of the first few chapters of the book is what happens when you upset the natural order of things, like when a husband dies and leaves a young widow, and she's a widow but she's really young, and so people don't know how to treat her. About what happens when you spare the rod and spoil the child, even though the Bible tells you not to. And what happens when children just disobey their parents, which again is what the Bible tells you not to do. There's comparison of widowhood and how women are treated in different societies based on their financial status. So the widow, the young widow in this book, she has a servant who's also a widow. Because one is rich and one is poor, the poor one actually seems like she has a better, easier life because there's no one for whom she has to keep up appearances. She's just a maid, so no one expects her to be the classic example of, you know, the model widow. And it's a really interesting side plot to this book, this comparison of the treatment of women across different social structures. So at first I wasn't sure what made this book satirical, because at first glance it was just, you know, this young boy living the life that he wants to live and his parents moving up in life. But the constancy with which the characters constantly compare themselves to others and the self-flagellation that they insist on pursuing when they're just beating up on themselves even though other people are looking to them in envy. But the fact that you are privy to these characters' thoughts and you can see them torturing themselves, each one wanting to be like the person next to them, when you also know that the other characters are all thinking the same thing. It became this satirical look at society, at relationships, at fortune and prosperity, and it became increasingly more comical as the book went on, as we got to know the characters better, as they settled into the roles that they would be playing in this book, but not necessarily settling into that version of themselves, because they're constantly trying to change, not necessarily change on the outside, but to change how they appear to others. It was a hilarious book. I laughed out loud in several places. And so that's a closer look at these three recent reads. They're all three very different books, and so if I had to recommend one to you, Windfall is the book that I'd probably recommend to just about any reader, because comedy is universal and this was a really funny book. So please go ahead and leave me a comment down below if you've read any of these and you want to talk more about them. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Tell somebody about these videos. Share them on social media if you like, and we'll talk in the comments. So until next time, happy reading. Bye.